thank everybody for coming out to our budget information and polling session tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Bunting. I have the pleasure of serving as your city manager. And with me tonight, of course, I have Dr. Linda Shiflett from the school system, our school superintendent. I don't know how many of you have participated in one of these events before. Maybe by show of hands, how many of you have attended one of our past events? So most of you. Those of you who are newbies, we really welcome you and thank you for taking the time to come out. Those of you who are returning, we also thank you for coming back out again. Hopefully you found these sessions worthwhile in the past and will find tonight's worthwhile as well. I want to go ahead and get right into our business tonight and remind you that we're talking about our operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th of each year. And so that's the calendar year, the fiscal year we're talking about would start on July 1st of 2014 and go through June 30th of 2015. When we talk about the operating budget, we're talking about the recurring expenses of the city and the school system, the salaries, the supplies, the gas for the vehicles, the operation and maintenance of our community facilities, be they schools, libraries, community centers, what have you. We also each year talk about our capital budget, and those are the one-time investments that we make in our infrastructure and our buildings in the way of major upgrades or are building new roads or new facilities. We do that through our capital improvement planning process, and we also have a similar input process for that, but we do that in the fall of each year. So tonight we're primarily focusing on the operating budget, the money that goes for the day in and day out services that you've come to expect from the community and from the school system. Why do we do this? Why do we invite you to come out and participate in the sessions? Well, in 2010, when I first became city manager, we were facing a very large budget gap that was driven by a lot of national recession and housing market issues. And we knew we were going to have to make tough choices that involve cutting things. And I want to tell you, as city manager, there's not a thing that we do as a city government, and I think I can speak for Dr. Shiflett when I say it's likely true in the school system, that there's not a thing that they do that doesn't have value or meaning to the community or to the school students that they serve in some way, shape, or form, or else we wouldn't be doing it in the first place. So when you're facing large deficits and you have to make decisions about what to cut, you know you're going to impact people in some way. And so we wanted to involve the community in those choices to say, if we've got to make those tough choices and impact services that you come to expect, let's ask you what you think about those and honor that as best as we can. Now, we can't always honor things 100% because we have legal issues we have to take into account and fiduciary responsibilities to students in the case of the school system or to clients of human services in the case of the city, but we try to honor that as best as possible. So we embarked upon this new way of building the city budget, and that involves education of the public, making sure you know what we know about how the budget is built, both on a revenue and expense side, involving the public as best as possible in the decision making, as I said. We introduced preference polling. Many of you hopefully got, if not all of you, got the device when you came in that we'll use later tonight that will allow you to express your opinions and preferences, and that's where we really get your involvement in the decision making. But honoring, as I said, the fact that in the case of the city, the council and the manager have to make the final decisions based upon legal requirements. And similarly, the school board and the school superintendent have to make the best decisions they can within their legal and fiduciary responsibilities. But we found that this was a better way, and even as our deficits have gotten smaller, we have found that this way serves us very well as a community. So I want to say to you, even if we get really strong growth in future years, which I hope we'll see in relatively short order, we'll still have this process and still invite you to be part of the conversation. This is, in essence, a new way of doing business that's a permanent way. And I say that because I've had some people say, well, if you're having budget polling this year, you must be looking at a big tax increase like you did last year. And I want to start off by saying, just because we're having these sessions doesn't mean we have any predisposition about what we're going to do or not do. And I certainly don't want people coming in and thinking we're looking at a large tax increase like we did last year. This is just a way to inform you and involve you and get the best thinking you as a community have about our budget, and we'll try to incorporate that as best as possible. And if we get to a time where we have extra revenue to invest in new services, we'll want your opinion on where we make those best investments. So hopefully you're going to get accustomed to coming to these types of events every year, regardless of financial circumstance. Tonight, we're going to look back over the last 4 years of input because I don't believe in asking the same questions every year. You've told us what your needs and wants were, and those don't change appreciably from year to year. So we're going to look back over the last 4 years of input and honor that and talk about the impact it's had on our budget decision making. Then we're going to talk about next year, the fiscal year that we're talking about this evening, 2015, and what we're facing both from a city side and a school side, and then get you into some preference polling about some of the issues embedded in that budget projection. And then we're going to take a break from the polling for a moment and look forward and what we think as we move forward we might be dealing with. Because I have to tell you, as a manager, and again, I think I feel comfortable speaking for the superintendent, it's not been really fun having to cut year after year after year. We look forward to the time when our economy, and not just our economy in Hampton, but the economy nationally is improving such that we can make investment choices, not just cut choices. So we want to talk about that and what we see on the other end and how we grow to an even better Hampton looking forward, and then do a little bit of preference polling at the end. So hopefully you'll stick with us for the entire event and not just leave after the first preference polling, because the second part of the agenda is as important, if not more important, than the first part of the agenda. We're going to take turns talking with you, myself and Dr. Shiflett, so that you can understand both the city and the school side of things. But as we kick off looking back at the last 4 years, I want to remind you how the context of what we started with and how we got into this. Of course, we all know we had a national housing market crisis that caused assessments for homes to decline. When housing values decline because of the housing market, we take in less real estate tax revenue. And that being one of our largest sources of revenue is what led us to have to make cuts at one level. So that was one level of cuts that we had to deal with. The national recession also caused a loss of consumer confidence. And when consumers aren't feeling as good about the economy, maybe they're nervous about whether they're going to have a job or not, they tend to pull back on discretionary spending. And when people pull back on discretionary spending, that impacts our sales and meals tax revenue or admissions tax revenue that you pay when you go to the movies, because maybe you're not feeling like taking that little extra income you have and going out because you want to store it away in case something happens with your job. So we got another whammy when we got hit with the consumer confidence and pulling back of consumer spending. And then the General Assembly, to solve its state budget challenges, cut localities and school divisions. And you're going to hear from Dr. Shiflett later how much they cut our school system in particular. I have to say the school system did get the worst of the cuts from the General Assembly, and they've been staggering. I think at the height it was as much as $30-some million of cuts, $32 million of cuts from the state for a singular budget year. And today the revenue that they have is still $20 million less, or a little bit more than that, than they had in 2009. So the state really hit us significantly. And when I say us, I don't just mean Hampton. I mean every school division across the Commonwealth. But we're focused on what happened here. The local flexibility to respond to these things had been hampered because we were already relatively thinly manned. Those of you who participated last year will recall the charts about our manpower comparisons, both at the city side and the school division side, to other localities. So once you've made cuts, which we did over the years to internally finance investment decisions we wanted to make as a community so we wouldn't have to continually go to the taxpayers with a tax increase, we get very thinly manned, and it makes the ability to cut deeper and deeper increasingly more challenging. And because we had lowered the tax rate very aggressively when housing values were increasing, we didn't have the flexibility of extra cash on hand to really deal with some of these challenges. So that's what we were facing. Now, what do we do in the way of asking you for input, and what did you tell us? The first year, in 2010, for 2011's budget, we asked you to look at the various city services that we had and tell us if you thought they were needs or wants. And most of the things that we were offering were needs as far as the community was concerned, but there were wants that we scaled back on. We scaled back on our neighborhood office and the level of engagement we do with citizens. We scaled back on the History Museum. We scaled back on the Arts Commission. We scaled back on a lot of the things that are quality of life types of programs. And that they were indeed, if you will, not absolutely required, and they weren't at the same level of need as, say, a police protection or fire protection. And so we were able to do those things. But just as you make choices in your household about scaling back when you have tight financial times on needs and wants, sometimes it's the wants that make life really special. And so we wanted to make sure we didn't go too far in eliminating the things that made us special as a community. but we did scale back in many areas, and you'll see the numbers in just a moment. Then in 2011 for 2012, we looked at that was left, and we asked you, service by service, did you think that there was the right funding level for that, or did you feel like we could decrease the funding level, or was it still an opportunity potentially to eliminate funding altogether? And we made some adjustments there as well. We did some consolidations of city departments and services. We minimized some overhead on the city side, and Dr. Shiflett will speak about the school division side. Then in 2012 for 2013, we gave you a set of cuts, and we asked you, could you live with these cuts, or did you find them to be unacceptable? And the cuts that the public said they could live with, we largely accepted, and the ones that they said couldn't, we largely kept intact. There were a handful of exceptions, and each year as we've made exceptions, we try to explain where those exceptions were. As an example, I recall in 2013, folks said they could live without 311. And what they didn't understand about 311 was if I cut that, I didn't have anybody to answer the phones in the operating departments, because we had funded 311 by taking positions out of operating departments. So that was an example where I had to use my administrative discretion and say, no, we just can't do that. Likewise, I had been inclined to scale back library branch hours because I had looked at the utilization of the libraries and saw that when we first opened at 9 o'clock in the morning, there wasn't a lot of utilization. Well, the public said, don't cut libraries. We like our libraries. We like the hours. They're very, very important to us. So that public input persuaded us to leave the library hours as they were. Then last year, we're missing a slide there. Last year, we came to you and said, Robin's telling me they got it. Okay. So what we ended up doing, I've touched on these, in those 3 years when we were doing the decreases and reflecting the community input, we ended up cutting 170 jobs on the city side, which is about 10% of our workforce, which really honestly had a very staggering impact since we were already thinly manned. But we really felt like before we came to the community and asked for a tax increase of any sort, we needed to do the internal looking at ourselves to make sure that there wasn't anything else we could do. So as I've touched on many of these things, I didn't touch on the fact that when we have vacancies, we hold jobs open longer. That puts some stress on the existing workforce, but we did that to try to generate savings. And we also deferred some capital projects and maintenance, as well as the other items I already touched on. Then Dr. Shiflett, I'm going to turn over, can tell you what they did in those years, and then we'll talk about last year.
Thank you, Mary. First of all, I want to say how extremely gratifying it is to see the number of people here tonight, because it tells me that you want to be informed about your decisions, rather than hearing rumor and hearsay, that you want to come here and you want to hear information so that you can speak intelligently about the things that we're going to present to you. So thank you very much for taking the time to be here this evening. It's important to all of us that we try to help our community understand what we're facing. And I want to also say that I sincerely appreciate the fact that we have a city manager who values the input of a school division. You know, as I talk to my peers across this region and across the Commonwealth, that really isn't very often the case. And it really is an exception that we have this kind of relationship. So I want to say a very special thank you to Mary for including the schools as part of all of these information sessions, because we are an integral part of the budget. And truly, if our school division is successful, it really adds to the health, vitality, the economic development of our city. And so we know the very critical part we play. Earlier, Mary mentioned the fact that the state has really been, it's really been the driver behind much of our deficit. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea, the extent of that. So if we look at the fiscal years 09 through 11, now this is a staggering number, $32 million worth of cuts from the state. That's a lot of money. And when you consider that our budget is comprised of about 85% people and benefits, you can very quickly understand the impact that these kinds of budget cuts have had on Hampton City schools. And as a matter of fact, in FY10 alone, we had an $18 million deficit from the state, just in that year alone. That was the year that the General Assembly decided that they would put a support cap on. So they would, instead of funding support positions at prevailing costs, so in other words, they would look at all the support positions across the Commonwealth and then fund at an average cost. They decided to go to a ratio of supporting one support person for every 4.03 students. And so that resulted in about an $18 million deficit for Hampton City Schools. Now, I'm speaking specifically about Hampton City Schools, but these kinds of cuts were across the Commonwealth in public education. So as we look at the amount of state cuts to present, it's a 21.5 net loss in state revenue. So that's really significant. And so the things that we've had to do in the past include elimination or reduction of services. Now remember, our core business is teaching and learning. And so when we make these cuts, we do everything we can to protect the classroom. And we've been fairly successful with that. We closed 6 schools. Some of that was based on enrollment, and I'll talk to you in a minute about that. But Mary Peak, Spratley, Lee, Mallory, Wythe, and Merrimack. Those were the schools that were closed. And as you know, we did repurpose Lee to be the campus at Lee, which was really a great benefit to us because we were able to pull some of our programs out of lease space back into one of our buildings. And it really pulled together a lot of the alternative education services into one building. And so we're really better able to serve the children of our community that need some alternative services. We eliminated spouses from the health insurance plan. We reduced transportation, in particular, to some of our choice programs. We limited funding for replacement schedules, and that's things like buses and computers. We restructured departments, and when we restructure departments, that very often means that we eliminated positions. We deferred capital budgets, capital projects, and maintenance. In other words, we delayed some of the things that we needed to do. And then the last part is that we've cut 431 positions in Hampton City Schools. That is almost 14% of our entire workforce. But it's mostly support personnel. Because if we look at our enrollment from FY09 of 20,350 students and the current enrollment of 20,150, that's a loss of about 200 children. You take your 35 buildings and spread that loss, just assuming that it's kind of spread equally, that's about 6 students a school. So you really can't reduce your teaching staff. And so the teaching staff has only been adjusted when we could make adjustments based on enrollment. Mary?
So with that as a backdrop, last year we asked a question when we faced yet another deficit from state losses and continued real estate declines. Do we want to continue to cut, or do we want to begin to reinvest in that which makes us special? And those of you who came out last year will recall we went through a series of slides that showed how the cumulative effect of all the real estate declines since the housing market crisis nationwide had caused tax bills to go down for homeowners. And we showed neighborhood by neighborhood by what the tax bill had been in 2008 and what it was in last year, which was 13. We also talked about various scenarios for protecting the school and city services that would have to be cut, and also to start to reinvest in some of the capital projects in our schools and city if we wanted to do that. And the polling that we did focused on those questions in particular. We had very clear results from the folks who turned out, and we did have larger attendance last year than we have tonight, although we're very pleased that all of you are here. We had at each session over 300 people that came out and expressed their opinions. We also did online polling, and we did a random scientific survey from telephone for people, just called up and asked them what they thought about these questions. When you looked at those 3 different cumulative surveys, 87%, nearly 90% of the people who participated in those polls said that they were willing to raise the tax rate, that we couldn't cut our way to prosperity. Now, people had varying degrees of support for different levels of tax increase, but almost everybody said we need to protect the things that make us special. And at the end of that, council raised the tax rate 20 cents, as you all probably know. We have gone back to verify our assertion that we made at the time that most people would still be paying less than they did in 2008 before these national issues hit us, and indeed that's been the case. It isn't true everywhere. As we told you last year, it wouldn't be true everywhere, but almost all of the folks in our community, unless they added onto their homes or had a very unique situation, are paying less today, even with the 20-cent tax increase, than they did in 2008. The other thing people told us at the time, and I thought this was very, very important, after we explained what had happened in all those years, we had a lot of people say, well, why did you wait so long to raise the tax rate? Why did we have to do it all at one time? Why didn't we look more incrementally along the way? If the housing values were going down 2, 3, 4% a year, why didn't we adjust incrementally that 2, 3, or 4%? And out of that, we shared that information with council. They asked the council finance committee to look at that, and a financial policy was adopted by council last year that said they wanted to see an incremental adjustment to the tax rate every year. If housing values started to go back up again, which we all expect they will at some point, then we should lower the tax rate, to try to keep the tax bill basically equal. Similarly, if they decline in the future, we should adjust the rate so that people pay the same, because pretty much what people told us is we're willing to pay the same. We don't necessarily want to pay a lot more, but we're willing to sort of pay the same to keep the same level of goods, because we understand you can't keep the same bundle of goods and pay less for it indefinitely. So that was the input we got last year. In case you weren't exactly sure how that money got divvied up, 3 cents went to that particular year's law to offset the real estate decline last year. Then we had mandatory increases for the schools and city, which included, for instance, the VRS requirements, the HERS requirements for the schools and cities, legal payments that we have to make for debt service, the mortgage payment for the city, and a variety of other issues there. We did give the school and city employees a salary increase for the first time in many years, a real net salary increase, and then we set aside funds to invest in city growth and in the school system. In the school system, in particular, the council chose to dedicate that to the one-to-one initiative that Dr. Shiflett will talk later about. People asked again, why such a big jump in 1 year? When we referred that question from the citizens to the Council Finance Committee, which is made up of financial accountants and academic researchers, they actually went back and said, if we had been adjusting all along instead of in one big time, what would the tax rate have been in any given year? And so this chart shows you that. 2010 is when we first started to get the big real estate declines, and so in 2011, if we had adjusted, it would have gone to $1.07, in 2012, $1.11, in 2013, $1.21, and then in 2014, it would have gone to $1.27. Even with that 20-cent tax increase, we're below where we would have had as an equalized tax rate if we had equalized it all along, which supports what we've been telling you, that most people are paying less than they did prior to that period. So, as I said, the tax revenue policy said adjust the bill to keep the total tax bill more stable. When assessments go up, we'll lower the rates again. We had a history of doing that when the housing market was rapidly increasing. Our tax rate had been $1.27. We lowered it all the way down to $1.04 as housing values were increasing, so that residents wouldn't have an ever-increasing tax bill. But the reverse of that is you don't want an ever-declining tax bill either if you want to keep the same bundle of goods. As I said, the goal would be, this is a better pictorial depiction of it, to keep the tax bill as close to stable and equal as possible. Now, as we turn into 2015 and talk about today, as opposed to looking back, I have to tell you that real estate revenues are still declining. The good news is they're not declining as much as they have in past years. This chart depicts the total land book assessment decline in each of the last several years. And you can see that in 2013 we took the biggest hit, loss of 4.1 overall, and then this year we're facing a 1.2% decline in assessments. Now, What this doesn't show you is the residential is actually decreasing more than the commercial. Our commercial has held value better than residential, and that's true in all cities around the region. I think this next chart shows you the regional declines since 2011. If you look at all the surrounding urban jurisdictions that we compare ourselves to, you'll see that what we've been experiencing in Hampton is not unique to Hampton. This isn't something that's endemic about Hampton and its housing stock or its viability as a community. In fact, Chesapeake and Virginia Beach have had bigger declines than Hampton and Newport News have. And that's surprising to some folks, but again, this is a function of the housing market generally and not something about the quality of life of communities. Most people tend to think Chesapeake and Virginia Beach are growing very rapidly, and they wouldn't have expected that. But even though they've had vacant land that they could develop into new housing subdivisions, their existing housing subdivisions lost value. And you can see we were right there about in the same percentage as Newport News. Norfolk performed a little bit better than all of us, but still had a major decline in that period of time. So one of the things we want to pull you about tonight, among others, is this policy goal that that sort of originated with the citizen conversations in settings like this, then went to the Council Finance Committee, and Council ultimately adopted a policy that said, as I mentioned earlier, how we would adjust incrementally regardless of what happened. Now, a policy is just a policy. It's just a guideline. It's not something you absolutely have to follow. And I will tell you, I, as city manager, I think Dr. Shiflett as superintendent, and I know the council and school board all struggle with, after a 20-cent increase, do you raise the tax rate again, even if it's just a penny, which is what the policy would suggest we would do to keep things stable. But because the public asked us to look at this and we went to the process of adopting a policy, it would be disingenuous for us not to come back and ask you what you think about that. So one of the things we're going to poll you about tonight is, what do you think about that policy? Do you still believe that's the right policy to change incrementally as opposed to waiting? So you might say, well, what does a 1 cent mean? When I process that, I need to understand what it would mean. So I'm going to show you what it would look like across the city and prove to you that even still, even with the 1 cent, most residents would still be paying less than they did in 2008. First off, what does 1 cent mean to you? The assessments across the city for residential property went about 50% of the folks' housing value continued to decline. About 50% actually stabilized. So about half the homeowners, even if we adjusted the rate by 1 cent, would not pay any more next year than they are this year. But I'll be honest, this year for the first time, we have a large number of residents whose property has held value and has not declined. And so a tax rate change would actually be an increase for those 50% of property owners. So for that half, what does a penny equal? We put up housing values here in $50,000 increments, so you can look and say, where does my house value fall, so you could get a sense for yourself. On the low end, we do have homes that are valued at $100,000 or less. That's about $10 per year. Of course, if you have a $100,000 home, you're probably not as able to absorb discretionary cost increases. For a $300,000 home, that equates to about $30 a year. So I'm not saying that any of this is easy for anybody, but that's what it would be if you were one of those properties whose property held value. And I'm going to show you the same examples we showed you last year. For those of you who weren't here last year, I'm going to start with Riverdale. I start with Riverdale because I grew up here in Hampton, and I grew up in Riverdale, so I sort of understand what a typical home in Riverdale looks like. And what I described for you about how we did this for Riverdale, we did for each of the neighborhoods you'll see. So in Riverdale, a typical home might be a tri-level ranch type style home where you have a garage, a den, then the next level you have living room, kitchen, and on the tri-level you have maybe 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. That would be like a typical home in Riverdale. And so we pull a typical home that looks like a lot of the other properties, and we look at the tax bill in each of the years. And you can see in 2008, the Riverdale home was paying $2,210 in real estate taxes each year. And then it shows you what they were doing, and this sort of shows what I was showing. As housing values declined, the tax bill for a property owner in the typical home in Riverdale got down to a low of $1,748. And that's again because we kept the tax rate the same as the values declined. Then this year, their tax bill went up $2,001, which is more than last year, but it's still less than 2008 before the housing crisis hit us. And if we were to add that extra penny on top, to the tax rate, the typical home there would be $2,018 next year. So we've looked at what their assessment would be next year and what their tax bill would be. And you can see that's still less, $192 less than they were paying in 2008. And that's how all these charts are going to work. And I'm not going to go through them all in the same level of detail, but now you understand how the charts were calculated and how they work. So looking at Colonial Acres, the bill there would still be $272 less than 2008. Cherry Acres, $144 less than 2008. And in this particular case, you see a decline from this year. That's because the assessment on the typical home there went down. Wheelton Heights, $129 less than 2008. Michaels Woods, $410 a year less than in 2008. Bethel Park, $294 a year less than 2008. Powhatan Park, $255 a year less than 2008. Merrimack Shores, $289 a year less than 2008. You might be, well, why are these curves different shapes? Because assessments don't work out uniformly in every neighborhood. We have to look at the actual market value and what homes are selling for in neighborhoods, and so that's why they vary. Fox Hill home would be $35 a year less than 2008. Aberdeen is actually a unique neighborhood. This is one of the neighborhoods that I said actually bucks the trend. In Aberdeen, it would actually cost more per year than in 2008. Sorry, Mr. Van. But that's because Aberdeen has held value. And I submit Aberdeen holds value for a couple different reasons. One, they're more moderately priced homes, and we found that the worst hits were in the higher value homes generally. But more importantly than that is that it is a unique and special neighborhood that retains value because people buy not just a home, they buy into community. And we find that when there is a sense of community, there tends to be a better protection of value. So it's not just the house that you're buying something more. And so I want to pay tribute to Aberdeen because I think it's a very special neighborhood and it has held value. So the downside to that is that when we adjust the tax rate, the residents there actually do pay more than they did in 2008. All of our neighborhoods, by the way, are very special. I'm not trying to say one is better than others, but I'm trying to explain why they buck the trend there. Buckrow is $96 a year less than 2008. And here's a chart that shows, and I know it's kind of complicated to read, but it's very fascinating because, again, housing value is either held value or dropped value or increased value differently across the city. If we could, and we legally can't do this, and we have to, under Virginia law, give every property the same tax rate. But if we could equalize for each of the neighborhoods, and we've just picked 3, as an example, the actual tax rate, if we had done it, what the actual tax rate is, and if it became $1.25 next year, the bottom line is what the actual tax rate was or would have been or will be with the tax rate change. But then if you look at what the next line down, the green one is the rate that would have kept Merrimack Shores tax rate flat, it would be $1.27. The rate that would have kept Fox Hill flat is the $1.37, and the rate that would have kept Riverdale flat is $1.34. So that just reflects the difference in housing assessments and values across the community. Now, even with a higher tax bill, and I want you to understand this because this gets to why we have some of the challenges of what we do, and we'll talk later about how we grow our way out of it. Hampton has a lower median value in homes than most of these other cities. You'll see a chart about that in just a second. So what we did here is say, what is the median tax bill in Hampton? If you take the value and you take the tax rate, what are you actually paying if you're the median home, which is in the $155,000 range. So the median home in Hampton's tax bill, even with a larger tax rate, is $1,846.80. Even though Virginia Beach, and I'll just pick that one, has a lower tax rate, their average, the median taxpayer in Virginia Beach is paying $2,298. So they're paying a bigger tax bill. Remember last year we talked about it's not what the tax rate is, it's what the bill is. A lot of people look at Virginia Beach's tax rate and say, oh, it's very inexpensive to live there. What the tax rate times the value actually produces a higher tax bill in Virginia Beach. And that's one of the ways they're able to keep their tax rate down. So the higher values you have in your housing stock, the more you can lower your tax rate. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, when we have a decline, if we don't offset it, and again, there's no predisposition that we are going to offset it, but I want you to understand if we don't offset it, what it means. We have a local funding formula for the school system where we share 61.8% of all the residential growth of our property taxes. We also share 61.8% of our personal property taxes and utility taxes as well. But because we're talking right now about the real estate decline, if the housing values decline, then the city and the schools both lose revenue. And if we're losing 1.21% of value, what that means is that the school system would take a cut of $750,000 because of the real estate loss, whereas the city would take a cut of about $500,000. That's just pure formulatic application. Now, when we start having our real estate revenue grow again in the future, the reverse would hold true. If we had 1.21% growth in real estate, the school system would get an extra $750,000 and the city would get an extra $500,000 for city services. But since we're talking about a decline, if we don't offset that loss, that gets, in essence, added to the budgetary gap you're going to hear Dr. Shiflett and I talk about. I do want to note, because last year we got asked about this, about personal property tax or car tax. We were asked, would we consider raising that instead of the real estate tax rate, or not raise the real estate tax rate as much as we did and instead raise the car tax. And we chose to focus largely on the real estate tax rate because that's where we had the losses. We hadn't had dramatic losses in personal property. But I do want to acknowledge, since it was a question that was asked last year, that Newport News raised their car tax 25 cents. And just to give you a perspective about that, had we followed suit and done 25 cents, or if we choose to do that in the future, it generates about $2.1 million. A lot of people don't realize how much the car tax generates. Now, it's also a tax that most people don't particularly like because it comes in two large chunks, and unlike your real estate tax, which is escrowed for you by your mortgage company, if you still have a mortgage, it is something you have to write one big check for, and it happens right at the holidays, and so we get a lot of complaints about that. And of course, Governor Gilmore ran on a no car tax platform, and people thought it would disappear altogether, and it never did. But that is something that's out there should we want to consider that as a community. Now, at the same time that we lose revenues, we also have cost pressures. And I'd like to use this example because it's something you can probably relate to. When you think about how gasoline at the gas pump has impacted you personally, I'm sure you can, it's impacted you quite a bit. A lot of times people think the city is immune from those prices because we're government. We're not. We're paying the higher prices too. So just put in perspective all the fire trucks, police cars, garbage trucks, school buses that are on the road every day, transporting kids to and from school or picking up your garbage. Magnify the impact that you had as a household times the number of vehicles we have out there. So there's a lot of reasons why costs go up for government. It's not, a lot of people like to think waste, fraud, and abuse. That's not what drives our budget. It's these kinds of real-life experiences and costs that you're experiencing yourself. So we continue to have costs that rise, and we have to deal with them. Another thing people don't think about is that when the economy is bad, people need government more, not less. We get more people applying, for instance, for food stamps or social services. And because they're entitlement programs, we have to meet those needs. So when healthcare costs go up, as they are going up, we have those expenses for our employees, just as your employer is having to deal with those issues for you and maybe passing some on the cost to you. We have to struggle with how much do we pass on to our employees, how much do we pick up. But we also have people that we have to pick up for that aren't our employees. As an example, for the prisoners who are in our jails, we actually have to cover the medical costs there. And when medical costs are going up, it results in a higher regional jail cost bill. It results in a higher local cost for our jails. So costs do keep rising. So when I look at the costs next year for 2015, and these are very, very preliminary numbers, and I want to caution you about that because I don't get my best revenue estimates until mid-March. That's because the personal property rolls have not been completed yet. We also don't get good sales and meals and lodging tax information until about mid-March because the state collects a lot of that and then they send it to us about 60 days after they collect it. And it's really hard to make predictions about sales tax until you have December tax figures. So this is the best that I can do at this point. It could get worse, it could get better when I get those additional revenue projections. But if I look at the real estate loss that I shared without a tax change. I look at the regional agency mandatory increases. The regional jail is the biggest one that we're facing. It could be as high as $1.5 million next year. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get that down, but it's a cost I have to write. I don't get to negotiate my regional jail cost, my HRT cost. Those are all regional agencies we have to cover. Our debt service, our retirement and health insurance cost, and property removed from the tax rolls through well-meaning policy are exemptions for veterans and elderly individuals are increasing. And when people have more exemptions, that means we lose more real estate value. When I add all those up, the preliminary projected gap between revenues and expenses for the city is $5 to $6 million that we're going to have to cut this year. And we can talk more about those in the question and answer period if you'd like, if you want more detail on any one of those. Last year, this is just the list of cuts we talked about last year as possible. I list them again, even though it was very clear people didn't want us to cut these things, because these are the things I told you last year that were left that we legally could cut. So they're the same list I've got to go back to, whether I want to or not, and whether you want me to or not. Unless we're willing to offset all of our revenue losses, we're going to have to make some cuts. There was a lot that we listed last year. The cuts we were facing were much more significant than this year. The gap. So I'm not suggesting we'll have to do all of these or even most of these, but this is the list of things that are not legally restricted, and I still have some ability to reduce or eliminate. I will say that as I look at that list, I want to honor as best as possible the public input that we've had in the past, and I think the best opportunity, if I had to make $5 to $6 million of cuts, and hopefully the revenues will improve, I would continue to defer some capital investments. I would look at delaying some master plan investments, scaling back city services. I'd hope not to eliminate anything, but for instance, I may have to go back to the library branch hours and say if people aren't coming in droves at 9 o'clock, maybe we open at noon or something like that. So those are things I'd have to look at, as well as reduce contributions to outside agencies that we're not legally responsible for. Not because they don't provide value, because they absolutely do, they're very valued partners, but because it's something that is not a direct requirement of the city government to provide. So those are the places I will likely go. I will do so in a way that minimizes the impact to the community and preserves what makes Hampton special. I'm not asking you to poll on those specifically tonight because you've already polled on them. And I don't think your opinions about those substantially change from year to year. But we will try to respect what you said about those and, as I said, do the least damage that we can when we have to make those tough choices. So I'm going to turn over to Dr. Shiflett for a little bit to talk about their budget projections and what they're facing.
Thank you. I often get a question about how can we be further along in our budget preparation than the city. And there are a couple of answers about that. First of all, in December, the governor releases a budget, his proposed budget. And because we're so formulaic driven, like on per student cost and fees, that we're able to take the information that we get from the governor's budget and plug in our student enrollment, and we have a preliminary idea of how much we're going to get from the state. At the same time, we have a formula that was adopted many years ago with the city. And so we continue to have conversations with them about where they see their revenue collection coming in. So we can start building our budget a little bit earlier because we have those pieces of information. And with the schools, these are the major areas where we're having stresses on our budget. Now, it's really not the revenue side that's causing the stress. Because if you look at the reduction in state funding that we're getting this year, it's about $1.1 million. And when you combine the possible reduction from the locality of about $750,000 that Mary mentioned earlier, then that's about $1.8 million. The rest of our deficit and our preliminary projected gap between our revenue and expenses is around $7 to $8 million at this point. It's comprised of all of those expenditure pressures. primarily driven by our retirement fund accounts. So those are really the drivers behind the pressures that we're seeing this year, along with a health insurance increase. We have an increase in some of our regional programs. We have increases associated with the Affordable Care Act. And so what I need everyone to understand at this point is that in our budget development process, it still is very fluid. We get information in almost every day where we can make some adjustments on some of our projections. And so what you're seeing right now is between $7 to $8 million of reductions that we have to make. I thought this might be interesting to you. So if you look at Virginia in terms of its relative wealth, it's about 8th in per capita income, but it's 32nd in per capita state taxes. So there's the capacity there in terms of being 8th in wealth, but 32nd in the state taxes. And then Virginia ranks 38th in the nation in the amount of money that they give per pupil for pre-K through 12th grade, so public education. But it's 13th in state corrections. Does that hit anybody as being a little strange? See, I have 20,150 students, and I'm proud of them. I talk about them as my kids because I really feel like they are. And we need to advocate more for the Commonwealth of Virginia paying attention to public education and providing the funding that we need to adequately provide the services and support that we need in each one of our school divisions. And I'm not speaking just for Hampton, but across the Commonwealth. So again, remember the state, the net result has been $21.5 million since FY09. So what does that mean for the school division? Last year, we did a series of polling, and you're going to see, and you have seen, if you've been reading the paper, many of the same things are on our list again, just like the city. So when we look at potential cuts and the things that we're working on at this point, there are cuts to instructional programs and services. For example, potential cuts include the high school 8AB. It includes increasing the class size at grades 4 and 5. It includes middle school teaming. It includes the PYP program and the primary years program and the middle years program. It's part of the IB program. We are not looking at cutting the IB diploma program in the high school, so I just want to make sure that's clear to everyone. Excel Art, that's currently being housed at Spratly. We're looking at consolidating or closing schools, and so Mary Peak comes up again. And Mary Peak has been on the list for the past few years. It is our early childhood. Shoot. I do that so often because it used to be at Mary Peak. Moton Early Childhood Center. Thank you. And middle school, and the possibility of looking at consolidating a school. Changes to work schedules. Remember I told you that about 85% of our budget is comprised of people and their benefits. And so the only way that we can achieve closing that deficit is looking at people and their work schedules. So we are looking at potentially making our kindergarten instructional assistants part-time, 12-month contracts going from 249 days to 245, and that really results in about a 1.6% decrease for folks on the 12-month contract. We're looking at outsourcing support services. So those particular support services are substitutes and custodians. We're looking at reducing or eliminating supplements. And in terms of reducing supplements, we're looking at an overall 25% reduction in any supplement paid, and then eliminating the supplement for the National Board Certified Teacher. Now, before you get upset about that, I need to let you know that they are getting a supplement from the state. So they get a supplement from the state the first year that they become a National Board Teacher of $5,000, and then every subsequent year it's $2,500. We've been adding another $2,000 to that. So our proposal is to take the city-sponsored, the Hampton City Schools-sponsored supplement away. Cutting positions. So as we look at individuals who might be retiring, we're very carefully looking at, do we need to fill that position, or can we redistribute the duties? For example, we know right now that we have an assistant director in human resources that's retiring, and we're going to be redistributing the duties in that department. So we'll be very carefully looking at those kinds of opportunities. But we've also decided that we will look at the PALS IAs. They're part-time people who work in our elementary schools, who assist young people and teachers in reading activities. Cafeteria monitors. Now, again, we were able to actually, the cafeteria monitors are part-time folks that work during lunchtime. It helps the teachers have some duty-free period during the lunchtime. But we've discovered that we can move the cafeteria monitors into a separate fund. So they'll come out of our operating budget and go into another budget. So those folks won't actually be losing their jobs. They'll just be moving to a different fund. And then finally, we're looking at current standards of quality do not require that we have an assistant principal in every elementary school. Personally, I prefer that every elementary school have an assistant principal for many reasons. But we are looking at schools that we might be able to share an assistant principal. Staffing at state required levels, we're looking at our elementary school counselors going to the standards of quality level, our music and art teachers, which will result in elementary school of about 10 positions, and then ESL teachers, which will result in the loss of about 2 positions. So these will be taking those levels straight to what's required by our standards. And then changes to employee benefits, and most particularly we're looking at some potential changes in health insurance. Many businesses have gone to a high deductible health plan, and so we're looking at offering that in Hampton City Schools to effect some changes in our benefits. And so, again, the last 6 years have been very, very difficult in terms of the major cuts that we've had to make to public education in Hampton. And when we look at making these cuts, we're very deliberate about it and very strategic because we want to protect what's happening in the classroom. And so everything we do really focuses on our mission of every child, every day, whatever it takes. And so as we look at whatever reductions that we may make, the first question that we ask is, what impact will this decision have on the classroom? And that's how we filter through all of our decisions. Mary?
So we're just about at the first polling, but I want to answer 2 questions I get all the time. They were asked last year. I know Dr. Schulfett says she gets them when she talks to various groups, and so we might as well talk about those real quick. The first is, why can't we use the city's savings account? The city has a savings account. It's called Fund Balance, and we have a little over $50 million, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, sitting in the bank in that savings account. And people say, well, why not use some of that to avoid some of these cuts? I have to explain that just like our savings account works, just like your savings account works. Once you take money out of it, the balance goes down. And so if you're taking money out of the savings account to pay your grocery bills and you're not putting money back into a savings account, eventually you're going to deplete your savings account and you won't be able to pay the grocery bills in the future. So you're really just avoiding the pain for a little while and digging a hole that's deeper for you to get out of. And so it's not financially responsible to do that. And quite frankly, if we were to do it, we would endanger our city's bond rating, which is sort of our credit score. You know, you have a credit score. If you look it up, it will tell you how well you're managing your household income and what the banks think of you. Well, we have a bond rating, which is the equivalent of that, and we have a very strong bond rating. It's a AA+. It's the second highest rating a locality can get. The highest is AAA. So if we do this, our AA+ rating is going to go down, and it will go down big time, and it will cost us more when we borrow money for big capital projects that we need to do. So it's a very bad thing to do. But on top of that, we need to keep a reserve for emergencies, like, for instance, Hurricane Isabel. When Hurricane Isabel hit us, all the recovery that we did, picking up the limbs, the police and fire responses, all those kinds of things cost quite a bit of money. And you might say, well, FEMA, the federal government's supposed to pay you back. Well, they don't pay it all back, first off, and they don't pay you back for a very, very long time. You have to submit receipts and go through the federal bureaucracy and get it paid back. And if you're waiting for FEMA to come in and take care of it, you're going to be operating at a deficit for a very long time. So without that money in a bank account, then we're not able to respond to emergencies. And as a coastal community, we do have to be prepared for those kinds of eventualities. We also use it for cash flow purposes so that we don't have to do short-term borrowing. All of our major receipts, real estate taxes, personal property, the state funding for schools comes to us after we've spent the money. Our real estate and personal property tax bills, of course, aren't paid till December, so we've operated from July to December on the cash that's in the bank, and then the tax revenue comes in and helps us. So it's very, very important that we have a savings account, but the biggest issue is you can't pay for recurring expenses out there. Now, what we can do, and this is going to lead to the second question, is we can use money in that savings account that's in excess of a reasonable amount to keep in the bank. We have a policy of keeping 10% of the city and schools' budgets in the bank. So we have to have at least 10% in the bank to cover these emergencies and cash flow. But anything in excess of that, we can use, but you should only use it for one-time capital investments. One-time expense, one-time revenue. Just like if, say, you wanted to do a one-time vacation or a one-time major upgrade to your home, it would be okay to take it out of your savings account. The second question, and as I said, this one leads into that, is how is it that we can spend millions on projects, they happen to be capital projects, but not be able to avoid cuts? And we get this in the form of various questions like Harbor Square purchase or the courthouse. We're looking at potentially some new athletic facilities, new roads. How is it that you can even think about those things when you're having to look at these kinds of cuts? Well, the answer is these projects are funded with only one-time money that is legally restricted, or from a financial credibility standpoint, should be restricted for one-time capital investments. Bonds. Our bonds are like our mortgage payment. When you go out and buy a home, you get a mortgage. You don't pay cash up front, right? Most of us get a mortgage and pay it off over 30 or 15 years. When we build a new facility, whatever it may be, a new road, a new school, a new courthouse, we do the same thing, and we pay for that over 20 years. Most people don't expect to pay for it all at one time, but bonds can only be used legally for long-term investments that have that life cycle that you're paying for. Just like you can't go get a mortgage and pay for a car. Well, you could get a line of credit, but that's not very wise to do either. But generally, you can't get a mortgage for something that isn't that long-term investment. We also get dedicated revenue from Virginia Department of Transportation, for instance, for road projects. So some of those infrastructure improvements that you're seeing around town, like King Street or on Kecoughtan Road, people will be like, why are you wasting money on those kinds of things? You could use that for the schools, or you could use it for police and fire protection. No, we can't. Those are funds from the Transportation Fund to do infrastructure improvements. So if we're not availing ourselves of those, we're letting other localities take that money and improve their infrastructure. And as I said, people, a lot of times we fund some of these projects out of our savings account. A good example of that was the Harbor Square purchase. We took some money out of the savings account and took some money that had already been dedicated for downtown to the downtown master plan implementation. The downtown bid suggested that we reprioritize their funds to be able to do that. In almost every case, we're doing those types of purchases either because they're legally required or because they're going to grow our tax base. Harbor Square, as an example, is a project where we took down an apartment building that was dilapidated, had high crime, major problems. We now have virgin vacant land that we're getting ready to put out to proposal for developers to come in and redevelop. Almost like, how many of you are familiar with the former Sinclair Gardens that got turned into Bailey Park, or the former Southampton apartments that got taken down and got turned into a nice housing property called Crown Point? So that will ultimately grow our tax base. So, I mean, it's easy to think, well, if you just didn't spend the $13 million on Harbor Square purchase, or if you didn't spend the $23 million on the courthouse, that money could be used for these kinds of things. I'm telling you, we can't do that legally. It would be inappropriate from a financial advisability standpoint, but most of these are dedicated revenues that have restricted purposes. So with that, we're going to turn to the first round of preference polling tonight. Hopefully, everyone who wants to participate in the preference polling has a little white polling device. Shelley, my assistant here, is going to show it up. And if you don't have one, please raise your hand. I have staff who can hand one out. Young people are allowed to participate if they want. So if you want one, raise your hand. We are going to explain how these work for you. And we're going to start by explaining that whatever you answer in your responses is completely anonymous. We have no way to track your answers with your device. So feel free. Please be as fully honest as you want. There's no way anybody can say, they don't like the way you answered. If you go to answer and you accidentally hit the wrong button, you can change your response. Only your last response is recorded. If you hit the same button 3 times, it's not going to record 3 times. It only records once. But if you make a mistake, you can change your answer. As long as the polling light, and we'll show you that in a moment, is green, you can change your answer as many times as you want. The screen on your keypad will display your response when you hit it so that you know that you hit the answer that you wanted. Okay? We're going to start with some demographic questions. 1, so that we can track our responses and making sure we're reflecting the diversity of our community, and 2, that gives you a chance to get familiar with the devices. So over in the screen, at the very bottom, on the right-hand corner, you'll see a green box. That tells you the polling is open, and you can answer whether you're male or female. So you'll hit A or B on your device, and when you look at your device, when you hit that button, you'll see it's recorded, because it will show you in the little screen that what answer you've recorded, okay? And Shelley is looking to see, it looks like we have about 56 responses. Does that match with the number of people who signed in roughly? Okay. We're always going to be looking for that number to get as close to 57 as possible. The quicker you poll, it will tell us how many people have polled, the quicker we can move on to the next set of questions, okay? So in the room tonight, we have 58% men and 42% females. Thanks to modern technology, we get the answers very, very quickly. So now I'm going to ask you to indicate your age. Can everybody see the choices visibly, or do I need to read them out for you? Can everybody see them okay? All right. Sometimes the angle you can't necessarily see. All righty. Looks like we have 56 responses. There we go. So we are a diverse group, but we're more in the later years in our life, 35 and up. We have a few young people. Glad you're here, showing interest in your community. All right. Next, if you'll indicate your ethnicity. You have several choices there. Okay, we're at 57. So we are predominantly a European Caucasian mix tonight. Typically what we find is, depending upon the area of the city we go, those change, the demographics will change. So we hopefully, by the time we're done with this, will be more reflective of our overall community demographics. The next question is your education level. Okay, so we're a fairly educated group. And I think those that are in the high school are still in high school, so hopefully they'll be college graduates one day and make their parents proud. What zip code where you live, work, invest, or visit most? Which zip code do you identify with the most? Okay, not too surprisingly, this is a 23669 zip code area. A lot of people would find this, and then 23664, of course, being Fox Hills, so that's to be expected. Are there children in your household who attend Hampton City schools? Citywide, only about a third of the households have children in schools, 25 to 33%, depending upon the year. But we like to just see in the audience, are we reflecting that demographically? So that's about what it would be citywide, I think. All right, now we're going to get to the preference polling questions. And the first question we're going to talk about is that financial policy we spoke of earlier. As I said, if we were to follow the policy, it would be a 1 penny adjustment to keep the tax bill roughly the same for folks citywide, and to keep the city and schools from making another $1.2 million of cuts. If you support that policy, even in light of the large tax increase we had last year, you would press A. B is, I support the policy generally, but let's wait, even if it means a bigger increase down the road, because we had such a large increase last year. Maybe we wait a little bit longer, but nevertheless, it's probably a good policy. And C is, I don't support the policy at all. I just think that we should see more services cut to keep tax rates from raising. So if you will express your preference now, either A, B, or C. All right, so most of you support the incremental adjustment, the 1 penny, holding the line with the policy. And those who don't still support the policy generally, for the most part, only a small percentage saying don't raise the rates, just keep cutting. The next question I put on here because it got asked last year, as I said, and I gave you the information earlier about the car tax. We were asked last year, since Newport News was raising it, why didn't we consider it? So I'm putting it on here this year as a benchmark. 25 cents, which would bring us level to Newport News, would generate $2.1 million. If that's something you support, that's option A. Option B would be, I support a smaller increase, but not 25. That's too much at one time. So we picked 10 because that generates about $830,000 to give you a benchmark. And C would be, I don't support changing that at all. Okay, more split on this one, but the majority, of course, saying hold the line on personal property tax rate, which I don't find too terribly surprising. That's what I would have probably expected. The next one is another issue. We talked earlier, and I glanced over it briefly in the interest of time, but I'm going to talk just a moment more about it because, again, this is something other cities in the region have done. We have a program that's called Elderly Tax Relief. It's available for those senior citizens who are on low income, who have low income, don't have a lot of assets, also for disabled persons, and that is an optional program. It's not required. We also have a veterans relief program that is a state mandated program. But the elderly program has been in place for a very long time, and it offers a couple different choices. Almost everybody takes the option of permanent exemption from the tax as long as they keep that low income status. What other cities have done more recently is move to a deferral program, which means that the elderly resident doesn't pay an increase in the tax bill as we change rates or as their values increase, as long as they're living. But when they do pass away, their estate then deals with the tax by either the distribution of the asset, the house gets sold and there's profits, or the heirs take care of that tax bill. So the elderly recipient still doesn't have to pay that increase, but ultimately down the road, the bill is paid. In essence, it's deferred and not permanently exempted. Because so many cities around us have done that, We are asking you what you think about that. It's not something we had considered in some time because we did feel, and particularly last year, we didn't look at it because of the increase in the tax rate. But with more and more people doing that, and with our tax relief program growing, the more taxes we write off, the more it puts pressure on other people. The thought behind this program is that potentially down the road, we would get the revenue that would help us to lower tax rates for everybody. So with that as an understanding, do you support keeping an exemption program, which is A? Do you support switching to a deferral program, as I described, where taxes are recouped when the property is sold? Or do you not support tax relief generally except what's mandated, that being the veteran relief for 100% service-connected veterans? Any questions about that? Okay, so a slight majority feeling like a deferral program is an acceptable option. Glad to see, that most of us do support some relief for our elderlies, however it's structured. Only 10% saying don't support any relief. All right, the next question relates to investments. As you will recall, when I showed that chart earlier today, I showed you that when we raised the tax rate last year, Council dedicated 3 cents to growing our tax base ultimately. And the idea was that $3 million, because each penny is roughly $1 million, would be used to accelerate master plan implementation and to do other kinds of investments that would grow our tax base. I think that's very important. We talked about that last year. I hesitate to even put this up here, but because that's recurring revenue, we do have the opportunity to defer or delay some of that. We are spending money this year, but we could do less next year and take that tax rate revenue and use it to support some of these things that we were talking about otherwise having to cut. But understanding, of course, that the less you invest, the less fast you grow your tax base. But it is a choice, and we've always committed to put all choices on the table. So with that as a backdrop, do you support keeping the enhanced level investment we approved for growth strategies, that being the $3 million? Do you support, that would be A. B would be I support that goal generally, but think we can defer some or all of it for a year since we continue to have that real estate decline, or you don't support investment to grow the tax base generally. Does everybody understand those choices? Questions? Okay. Okay, so people generally support the idea of investment, but a little bit split on how fast and how much that we do. So then we have one last question relating to the schools, and this relates to the state funding. And the reason why we're asking this question, you might say, well, this one is maybe a little bit more obvious, but we want to try to show that the legislators in Richmond what people think about this issue. So this relates to how much do you think the state should be doing? Do you believe the state should be providing its fair share, i.e. not cutting us that $20 million, even if it means cuts to other state programs or additional state revenue, or do you believe that funding for education should be handled at the local level? Now, as you're polling on that, I do want to say that our Hampton delegation is exceedingly supportive of education to a person. But, not making a commentary on, politics generally, but our delegation's views are not shared in Richmond broadly, particularly when you get to some of the finance decisions made at the General Assembly. So I want you to know this isn't, a commentary on our senators or our delegates, because they are very, very supportive of education, but we do think it's important that we send a message to Richmond broadly, the leadership at the House, the leadership at the Senate, about the importance of state funding for education, if you so agree. So it looks like we still have a handful of people who haven't polled. Does anybody else want to poll on this question? Mm-hmm.
How much is the fair share? I mean, how you always give me a policy
Right.
question, but
Well,
fair share.
and it changes every year, but the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission, or JLOC for short, is the independent financial arm of the General Assembly. And I don't know that they've updated this study in the last several years, but for Hampton, this was before the $20 million cut. JLARC had determined that the state was underfunding education to the tune of about $20 million before the $20 million of cuts. So by their own state standards, Their independent review commission, they have said that they're not funding the fair share. But the fair share, the way you would actually calculate it, and the way it's supposed to be calculated, and the way JLARC looked at that, is they looked at the standards of quality for education. If you look at what Virginia says is a strong school division and what it should be, and what positions are required to fund that, and what salaries are appropriate for those positions, you'd then run a sum total for what it takes to provide that education for an elementary child, a middle school child, a high school child, and then you'd look at the number of kids that you have in the district, and you'd look at the performance data and the mix of students who are coming to school ready to learn versus not ready to learn, the special ed and all of that, and then they come up with a number for that. And then theoretically what they're supposed to do is fund based upon what's called the composite index. And the composite index is a weighted factor. If you were the average city in Virginia, the state would pay 50% and the locality would pay 50%. But the composite index looks at relative wealth and relative condition of the locality's ability to pay. And so in our case, I don't know what our composite index, 28? 2874. So out of that, what the bill should be, Hampton would be paying 28% and the state would be paying 72%. And that's how it's supposed to work. But what JLARC found was that the state played games with the standards of quality and underfunded them and didn't put the right salaries and didn't put the right number of positions. And to that point, no school division in the Commonwealth, when they did this study, operated at the SOQ funded position level, not one. So if not one can operate at that level, there's presumably something wrong with that level. Well, that's our best term for the poll. I mean, for the convoluted explanation I just gave you, but there is a methodology that JLARC uses to calculate what fair share would be.
And define for what JLARC is.
Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission.
The state panel?
It's a state panel. And they're the ones who've done that work in the past.
You might want to mention that Hampton locality has always funded more than the minimum required by the index. I mean, we make more than our required local effort. We're still struggling.
Significantly more.
If the state is saying as our fair share.
Does someone have a budget document here by chance? Because we actually show in the budget document how much more we pay than the state required amount to make up for those deficiencies. Gloria can look that up. Are there any other questions? You think you have everybody polled there? Yes.
Who cut all this money? Was it the last governor or the current one?
Well, it's actually the General Assembly that approves the budget ultimately.
But I mean, who was the governor? Was it this current? Was it McDonald?
Well, I mean, actually, some of it probably happened before McDonald, too, if you think about the years, because 9 is when you start. Right, so that would be Kane, and then it continued under McDonald.
Kane actually did the support cap.
Okay. I don't know if you heard what Dr. Shiflett said. The support cap cut that resulted in an $18 million loss, Dr. Shiflett mentioned came under Governor Kane, and then continued cuts came under Governor McDonald. And again, it's really a combination of the governor and the General Assembly. And the budget that the General Assembly is dealing with right now was introduced by Governor McDonald before he left. So Governor McAuliffe's first budget that he'll introduce will be modifications next year. He's doing some amendments this year, but he's basically inherited a budget on the way out that McDonald left on the way out. What did you have? Hampton's local contribution exceeds that fair share that the state says we should have to pay by $42 million. So if the state were doing what they should do theoretically, again, a penny being roughly equal to $1 million, and we didn't have to do that excess, that would be 42 cents on the tax rate. And I think that speaks well to how we value education as a community, that we've been willing to do what the state funding doesn't provide because we really believe in our young people. But what I hope to do with this data is to share that with, as I said, the legislators beyond our delegation, give it to our delegation so they can use it when they talk to their fellow peers to show that we really do think the state should step up and do what they need to do for schools. All right, we're not going to do any cut questions this time because, as I said, you've asked, I don't believe in asking people the same question over and over and over. You've told us all that data's online. You can see what the data was last year. We have it available. We'll draw on that data. I don't want you to think that that input you gave us last year is going to be ignored. It's still there. It's still captured. But we thought what would be good to do is, in our last bit, is tell you a little bit about investment strategies and then poll to see what you think about some of those investment strategies. So with that, stay because you have more polling questions to answer. Keep your devices. We're going to turn to how we grow our way out of this, because unless the state steps up and does this, we're going to keep facing some challenges, particularly as it relates to education funding. So how do we grow our way out of that? Oh, I have the clicker. I'm sorry. I turned it over to you, and I thought you had to go back. Sorry. So there are different ways for growing our way out of this. I mean, what we do as a school division and what we do as a city. And as Dr. Shiflett said earlier, what the school system does helps the city, and what the city does helps the schools. So although we're going to talk about it in pieces, Dr. Shiflett's going to go first. I don't want you to think that we're divorced of the strategies that they make, because the stronger our school system is perceived, the more likely we are to get other types of investment on the housing and business side. And similarly, the better housing and business base that we have, the higher housing values that we have, the more tourists we have, the more money we have to make a stronger school system. So they are intricately linked. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shiflett to talk about what the school division does to grow the revenue pie.
And before I start doing that, I would also like to address another question that I get very frequently. Many of you may have been reading the newspaper and seeing the budget discussions about other school divisions. And in particular, we often get compared to Newport News. And so when I go out and speak to our school faculties, and I do that, particularly during the budget cycle so that I can answer specific questions for them, I often get this question, well, why is Hampton where it is? And Newport News is saying that they really don't have any budget pressures. Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. A number of you indicated that you came to the forums last year. And do you remember the discussion about the tax rate and the tax base in Newport News by any chance? All right. Newport News has what two big companies? Shipyard and Waterworks. Does anybody remember the cents value of where they start before we even begin? 20 what? Way high. I said 20 what? I gave it away. All right, so way high. It's actually around 22 cents. All right, so let me equate that to what it means to the school division. Newport News Public Schools, from its locality, gets $248 more per student. Multiply that times 20,150 students, and it is over $6 million. That's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money that would help close our budget gap. But we don't have the Waterworks, and we don't have the shipyard. And so that's why it's so important to Hampton to look at strategies to really enhance our community, to strengthen our schools. And then there's one other piece to this. Newport News Schools has had a slight growth in its student enrollment. And so while we're projecting 150 students less, they're projecting a few students more. And so you get more money for increased student enrollment. And so I get asked that a lot. And so I like to help people understand why some of these things happen the way they do. And other localities that surround us may have a higher local composite index. And when Mary just talked to you about the local composite index, it really measures the locality's relative ability to pay for public education. And so for Hampton, it means that roughly we should be paying 20 cents on the dollar for public education. But when you look at Williamsburg, James City County, they're at a 0.80, the highest local composite index, which means that they have much more wealth within their community to pay for public education, because they should be paying about 80 cents on the dollar and the state contributing about 20. So I hope that helps you understand why some of the why we have some of the differences among the school divisions, and particularly this area. So, as we look at the schools, look at how do we improve and how do we grow, how do we attract more families to Hampton City Schools, it really is looking at getting more people into Hampton, buying homes, having schools that are strong so people want to invest in the neighborhoods, improve performance. We must continue to improve our performance in Hampton City Schools. And also looking at the curb appeal of our buildings. And not only the curb appeal, but as you walk into the building, does it look clean? Does it look like the building is a safe place for our young people to be? And so, it becomes difficult to try to continue to make enhancements when year after year you're experiencing these budget gaps. But it's critically important. So I want to take just a few minutes tonight to talk to you about some of the things that we're doing in Hampton City Schools. Now, let me ask, how many of you here attended a Hampton City School? Yay, that's wonderful. Have you been in a school lately? Yay. Well, I hope I'll give you some information tonight that will tell you a little bit about some of the newer programs that we're offering. Because in Hampton City Schools, it's really important that we focus on college and careers. And so we've done a lot of work around the whole connection between what our workforce needs and looking at developing career pathways, which means that when you look at, for example, at Bethel High School, we have a Governor's Health Science Academy. I don't know how many of you have been over there to visit. But I would love for each and every one of you in here to take the time to go and visit some of our schools so that you can actually see some of the new programs that we have in place. But in the Governor's Health Science Academy, we are partnering with many of our medical, like Centera Hospital and many other medical partners. But when you look at the careers that are growing the fastest, it is the health career field that has tremendous growth, not only in our region, but across the nation. And so at Bethel High School, our students are beginning the first steps toward planning for that particular career. And so when you look at that career, you can think about the many, many options available, all the way from diagnostic services, therapeutic services, biotechnology research and development, the support services. It's like somebody who takes care of the medical billing, the medical records, and then the health information is people who help people learn how to be more well in their life, the whole wellness aspect. I have left these brochures in the back for you at that back table. Please pick one up and look at it. There's one for each one of our academies. But again, I want you to see the investment that we're making for our young people because we believe it's important to help them make those decisions. I don't know about you, but I had 2 children. And my goal for them, whether they went to college or not, I wanted them to be on their own, productive, and off my paycheck, right? Don't we all want that? And it doesn't matter whether their path is through college or some kind of post-secondary, post-high school training, or whether they go to the military. The important part is that they become self-sufficient. And so these programs are designed to look at what we have in our region and to develop strands that will help young people be able to have jobs. The other thing that I would love to have happen is that our young people would not only get these skills while they're in high school, but they would stay. That they would make Hampton their home. And so that's a synergy between the school division and the city. Because as we are developing a more trained workforce, we'll be able to attract the businesses and industries to this area. The next one is our brand new one. It's currently in the process of development, but is our Aerospace and Information Technology Academy at Hampton High School. And here's the flyer on that. And this one is done in partnership with NASA, the National Institute for Aerospace, Hampton University, Thomas Nelson Community College, and a number of other local colleges and universities. And this is really a very exciting opportunity for our young people because it's going to combine a lot of elements of engineering, but engineering as it particularly relates to the aerospace field. And then the information technology portion is really devoted to skills in the business management area, so marketing, advertising, things of that nature. The Architecture and Applied Arts Academy, known as the AAA Academy, is at Kecoughtan High School. And as its name suggests, it really focuses on the area of architecture. And so they're preparing young people for design careers in architecture, architectural engineering. And then on the applied arts, it's really looking at that kind of that fine arts blend. And so what we're looking at is jobs as graphic designers or fashion designers. So that's Kecoughtan High School. And then at Phoebus High School, and this really is the first, well, Ms. Henry knows all about this as a former principal over there. But at Phoebus High School, many, many years ago, it was back when I was in career and technical education, we began the Center for High Tech. And it really is kind of the front runner of what we now call the career academies. But at what we call the IDEA, Information Design and Engineering Academy, young people have opportunities to go into engineering or information technology and design. And I don't know how many of you have been over there recently to see Phoebus High School. I always call Phoebus High School my jewel in the rough because so many people don't know about what's going on over there. You see the picture of that young man right there? They have a robotics program. And in that robotics program, they participate in Robotics First competition, and it will be starting shortly. You cannot get those young people to leave that school. They're there until we make them leave at night. The parents bring food to them, otherwise they would probably not eat, because they get so wrapped up in their learning. They design a robot to do a specific task, and then they go compete. And so what happens is that this project really takes on a life for them. And see, that's the way learning ought to be for all kids. It's something that they get so involved in that they lose track of time. Do you have something that you do that you get so involved in it? That's how learning should be. So this is a project-based learning experience for them, but it's powerful. And so the other part of the academy over at Phoebus High School deals with a lot of the media arts. And again, I invite you to come over to our schools. I have the brochures back there, but if any of you would like to come out and take a visit to any of our academies, let me know. Give me a call, send me an email. I'll take you over there and I'll show you. Because I think you'll be proud of the kind of work that our young people are doing. And the kinds of equipment that they're dealing with. Have you ever heard of a 3D printer? We have them, and they're used by our students. It's important to us to replicate what our young people are going to be finding out in business and industry. So whether that means a software application that we're using or the specific equipment that they're using, we try to replicate it as closely as possible. Okay, we also have schools of choice throughout our division. And remember, I think it's so critically important to have schools of choice so that parents can look at the special talents and skills of their young people and make a decision based on that. And so we have Armstrong School for the Arts. We have the Cooper Magnet School for Technology. And in Cooper, our young people are doing design briefs. What a design brief is that you're looking at a problem and you're developing a process and developing materials and developing a project to solve that problem. So they're doing, design briefs are done by engineers. And so this really helps provide a foundation for our young people so that as they go forward into some of our other schools, for example, in Andrews, pre-K through 8 school, they have a small magnet program for engineering. So and actually it's STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And over at Phoenix, because they're right in the backyard of Bethel, they do their STEM program in health sciences. And so we're trying to build that career path, but also that information path for young people to help them make decisions earlier. And again, it goes back to something that I think is important to all of us as adults. Did anybody have their young adult going off to college and taking more than 4 years to get through because they couldn't decide what they wanted to do? I did. And so by helping young people look at career choices earlier and exploring them, often they can make those decisions about what they want to do. We have this school right here, our Jones Magnet Middle School, that has outstanding academic performance. Our fundamental schools of Barron, Tucker, Capps, and Eaton. Our state-of-the-art technology. And I have to tell you, Ms. Galata, who is our new PR director, she came to us from a school division near St. Louis. And one of the first things she said to me after she had visited some of our schools was, "Wow, you have such robust technology in this school division." And we often take it for granted. But you see a picture there of a young person up at a Promethean board. And these Promethean boards are interactive whiteboards, but they really help to make learning come alive for young people because they get up, they participate, they can manipulate the use of the Promethean board just as well as any adult. And it really helps to enhance their learning. And you've heard, I'm sure, about our new one-to-one initiative. Many thanks to City Council for helping support this for us. It's long been a dream of our school division. And young people are getting iPads for the pilot, although we may be looking at some other kind of tablet device later as we continue to roll this out. But I want you to think about how your life has changed and how you use technology. When you don't know the answer to something, what do? Google it. And so we want kids to come to school and they don't know the answer to something and they don't have anything but a book in front of them. Or they've got to run down to the library. And so having this opportunity to have a digital device ready at their disposal really assists them in their learning. It also makes learning come alive because in using digital textbooks, there are interactive videos embedded in them. And so not only can they, in a textbook you look at a picture, but when you have a digital device, you can click on a video, you can do a virtual tour, you can look at a video of explaining something. How many of you have heard of Khan Academy? Yeah, I know our young people have. Because, Michael, it helps when you have a math problem, doesn't it? Yes. Khan Academy is helps young people, like they may have gone through a particular math lesson during the day. They didn't quite grasp it. So Khan Academy has a whole series of lectures and explanations that they can later go to. Some of our teachers are also using flipped classrooms. And I don't know whether all of you know what that is, but I'm going to give you a really brief explanation. The teacher will post on YouTube or in some other way, post a video that does the instruction. So the students will watch the instruction as homework. So it's their first level instruction. Then they'll come into the classroom the next day and they'll work on what would have been homework. So the students who get the concept right away, they're off, they're practicing. But it frees the teacher to work with the young people who may need a little more help. So there's really a lot of exciting things that are happening in Hampton City schools. We have the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program at Hampton High School. And I'm very pleased to say that we continue to show improvement on our on-time graduation rates. This has been something that we have been very strategic and very focused on for the last few years. And all of our high schools are far exceeding the requirement of the state. And so we're extremely happy about that. My goal, though, we're happy that we're making progress, but I'm not going to be happy until every young person enters 9th grade and 4 years later walks across the stage. But not only walks across the stage, but they know what they're going to do on Monday. They're going to get a job, and they've got that lined up because they've got some industry certifications that we've provided for them. They're going to the military, or they're going to college, and they already have an acceptance in hand. That's what I want for our young people. Our Spratley Gifted Center, and then we have an amazing preschool program at Moton. Whenever I'm having a bad day, and I tell everybody this, I go over there and visit because you can't be sad after you've gone and see a school full of 4-year-olds learning. It is a wonderful opportunity for our community. And we're currently serving about 615 4-year-olds, and we could probably double the amount of young people that we're serving. And we are very optimistic that our new governor, Governor McAuliffe, who has publicly stated that he really supports preschool, that he will give additional funding for preschool education. Investment in facilities, you may have driven by some of our schools and see where we've enclosed the breezeways in our open concept schools. We're going to continue to do that. Not only because we want to keep the children out of inclement weather, but also because it's a safety issue. There are too many access points when you have the 2 doors at either end. And then, of course, we have our 2 beautiful new pre-K through 8 schools. But it's important that when people drive up to schools, in Hampton City schools, that there's great curb appeal, that the schools are welcoming, and then as they walk into the door, that they get great customer service, and that the schools are clean and orderly. And so as we look at Hampton City schools, we know that we have award-winning teachers, we have young people who are excelling and getting awards, and we have award-winning athletic teams. And so now I'll turn it over to Mary. And I'm sorry if I took too long. I just get excited about our kids and what we're doing.
Well, and again, the whole point to sharing that is to show that we are making, even as we're making cuts, our school division is making investments in students and doing new and innovative programming so that we become a school system of choice, not just for those who are already here, but for other people who will choose to move into our community because they want to be in our schools. Because as we increase students, we get more state funding, and that helps to avoid some of the kinds of cuts that we've been having to look at. Now, on the city side, again, the idea, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because I want to get questions and answers at the end, and we're nearing our time. I want you to understand we have an investment strategy too, and that strategy looks to bring in new homeowners, new businesses, and additional visitors, because it is the combination of those activities that will grow our tax base. And this is just a visual to give you sort of a sense of how that works. Let me get my clicker back out. There's some things that are fundamental about our budget that most people don't know or understand, and I want to start with those. It takes nearly every penny of all the residential taxes that are paid by property owners on the homes in the city just to cover our local contribution to the schools and the related capital expenses. I mean, think about that. Every penny of every real estate tax dollar paid just to cover the schools. So when you think about all the other things that we do, police, fire, libraries, community centers, parks, recreation programs, all of that is covered through basically business taxes, either in the form of taxes paid directly by the business or through the consumer taxes that their activities generate, or through the car tax. That's how we pay for everything else. I mean, it's pretty staggering if you think about it. So it is important that we focus on growing our business tax base and or increasing the value of our homes, as other cities have, and we talked about earlier, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake have higher valued homes to help offset that. Now, our ability to get new homes is somewhat limited because we're nearly fully developed as a community. Those of us who have lived here a long time probably realize that, but a lot of people see vacant land around the city, and most of that which is left, which is not a lot, is environmentally impacted, meaning that it's not possible to get a lot of new subdivisions. The way Virginia Beach or Chesapeake grows is they have a lot of vacant land that is being yet developed with new subdivisions. But we're not going to get new subdivisions because we don't have that kind of large amount of land. The only way to really enhance the residential tax base is through redevelopment of blighted or underutilized properties, or to have homeowners reinvest in their homes, and that might be done by upgrading appearance, upgrading interiors, adding to their homes. But the new subdivisions are really a thing of the past because we're fully developed as a community. Now, our largest tax revenues are the real estate tax by far, then followed by personal property, sales, meals, and business license round out the top 5. When you look at that, that tells you where you have to focus if you want to grow your revenue base. Real estate, I already talked about, is going to be somewhat limited in the fact that we don't have a lot of land left to develop. So you have to increase the value of what you have somehow and or redevelop. Personal property, that's just a function of car sales. There's not a lot we can do to influence that behavior. That tends to go with cycles of the national economy, consumer confidence, and then just personal lifestyle. If you have a kid who's becoming eligible to drive, maybe you pick up a secondhand vehicle for them. Sales and meals, of course, are functions of the retail establishments and restaurants that we have in our community. And business license is a gross receipts tax that are paid by all businesses. So that's a function of how many businesses you have and the volume or activity that they do. So those are the things that drive our investment decisions and why we focus on the 4 things I mentioned. Now, to increase our retail base, and a lot of times people ask us, why do you do that? I'm not going to go over all these numbers in detail, but this is why we started focusing on our retail sales. And when we looked at retail tax sales collected between 1995 and 2001, which is right before we started making the investments in like the power plant and then later at the former Coliseum Mall, you'll see that our sales tax increase was dwarfed in comparison to the other major urban areas. That's money that they have to invest in maintaining or growing city services or school services, which is why I always tell people, if you can, shop in Hampton, because when you shop or eat in Hampton, the tax dollar supports cities and schools in Hampton. If you eat or shop in Newport News, you're helping their budget. So just think about that. But that's why it's important to have the types of retail and stores and restaurants in our community that people want to eat and shop at. This shows you the relationship between real estate tax changes and sales. When we had high growth in annual retail sales, which was pre-Patrick Henry, pre-Chesapeake Square, we had on average 10% a year in annual sales growth. We actually lowered our tax rate significantly. Then when it started to level out, when we started getting competition from other malls, we had smaller annual retail sales, and we weren't able to reduce the tax rate as much. And then in the 90s, through a combination of what was then a recession and the full-blown competition and our retail offerings not keeping pace with what was offered in other communities, we actually had very small retail annual sales growth, and we had to raise the tax rate. And this one will blow your mind. I mean, this is moving forward, just looking at Hampton and Newport News specifically. From 1993 to 2003, in that 10-year period, Newport News had a 74.1% increase in sales, which meant they had a lot more money to invest in their budget, whereas we only had 7% increase in sales. So this really shows you why we got involved in Power Plant and Peninsula Town Center and a lot of the other strategic retail incentivization that we did. And when we did start to do that, you could see that the numbers started to change, that we actually started to increase in sales in the growth period in the 7 years between 2003 and 2010, actually surpassed Newport News. And even in the recession in 2011, slightly surpassed them, even though the growth was significantly less. So Power Plant and Peninsula Town Center, just to put those in perspective, between the two, in 2013, we got $9.9 million in tax revenue from those two developments, which is equivalent to 10 cents on the tax rate. That's why they're very, very important. Now, they don't produce high-wage jobs, and so they can't be your sole solution as a community, but when you get sales and meals tax revenue, it really does help offset deeper cuts and ultimately grow our revenue base, and so that's why that's very, very important. As I said, you can also focus on improving your housing values. There's a couple ways to do that. This is that housing value chart I was talking about later. The median value in Hampton is not the lowest of the urban cities in the region, but it is lower than many of the larger urban cities. Now, to some extent, that's because we're an older community. As you know, we're the oldest continuous English-speaking settlement in America, and that means that a lot of our homes were developed before homes, for instance, in Virginia Beach or Chesapeake. And so we have older homes that lead to generally lower values because they don't have the modern amenities that people are looking for. So it's not necessarily a bad thing about our community, but what it does mean is we need to grow our income, our housing values over time. And Norfolk has done that, and Newport News has done that. So we need to focus on that as well. Now, that doesn't mean tearing down all of our homes that we love. I grew up in Riverdale. It doesn't mean tearing down Riverdale, but it does mean helping people to invest in their properties so they grow the values over time. And that when we do have blighted properties in the city, has to get involved in tearing those down because they're dilapidated or whatever, incentivizing higher value homes to be built. And this is a chart we talked about earlier, so we don't need to talk about that again. A lot of the blighted property transition is very successful in increasing housing values. Just think about, for those of you who are familiar with Norfolk, Ocean View before and Ocean View now with the East Beach development. That's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about redevelopment. Properties that are underperforming, perhaps high crime, dilapidated, turning them into something better. And as I said, we have two examples in Hampton from the past, the conversion of Southampton Apartments to Crown Point and Sinclair Gardens to Bailey Park. And we do have some programs in our curb appeal program to help current property owners upgrade their homes. And perhaps that's something we should expand over time so that more people can take advantage of that and increase their home values. The increasing jobs in the business tax base is very, very important, of course, too, because you want to have high-wage jobs so people will want to work in your community, but then choose to live in your community and can afford to spend more money in your business, but also invest in their home. So they're all sort of interrelated. A lot of stuff has been going on in Hampton that's very positive in the job sector, and we're just depicting some of these. In 2013, we had over $20 million in private investment with 68 new jobs. And you might say, well, 68 doesn't sound like a lot, but in a recession, to be able to add jobs and have business investment is a very big thing. Some of these are new entries to our market. Some of them are expansions. In 2014, year to date, this is so far to date, we've had $10 million in private investment, 327 new jobs. These are some of those companies. And we have some really first-class businesses in our community that you may not even know about. Measurement Specialties, as an example, has been cited by Fortune and Forbes magazine as being one of the fastest-growing companies, small companies in America, and they do global work, and they're right here in our own backyard in our Magruder Central Park. M2 Pictures, Metro, as many of us know them, actually produces film for TV and film right here in Hampton, Virginia. They purchased the old post office building in downtown to expand their filming facilities, so they're growing. Tysinger added an Audi dealership this year. Old Point National Bank, of course, has built their corporate headquarters in downtown. Many people thought they would close in Phoebus. They're not closing in Phoebus. This is an expansion for them, and they chose Hampton as their corporate headquarters. So a lot of very positive activity going on in Hampton. A lot of times we get, well, why is the Gateway building vacant? The Gateway building isn't vacant. A lot of the things that people think are vacant actually have very positive economic development activities going around them. And I can't share them all with you tonight, but I do want to talk about the future too. As I said, we have this large tract of land out in the North Magruder campus that our EDA, our Economic Development Authority, has decided to basically focus as a science park to help facilitate higher wage jobs in the community. A lot of the opportunities here would be commercialization of technology done at NASA Langley, also building on the National Institute of Aerospace, and advanced composite manufacturing, modeling and simulation. So this is what our views are for that campus in the future. Increasing tourism is very important to us as well. Of course, we have the convention center, and we need to continue to increase utilization of that. Some of that was somewhat hampered by the downturn in the economy when the military and businesses didn't do as much travel as they had done previously, but we do continue to book it. It does relatively well. Of course, we would like better utilization, and we continue to focus on that. One of our true success stories you may not be familiar with if you don't have a young athlete is the Boo Williams Sportsplex. In 2013, the Boo Williams Sportsplex through AAU tournaments generated over $2 million in hotel stays in our community. And folks come from all over the country to play at the Boo Williams Sportsplex because of Boo Williams' association with AAU. He's for those of you who don't know him, was a star athlete in his day, and he's reinvested in Hampton, and he brings sports teams to us. And so one of the things that we've been looking at to create more overnight stays and more tax revenue is to build on the sports tourism, which is a growing market. You may have heard of plans that council is looking at to do one or more of these things. No final decisions have been made. The basketball court and indoor track expansion of Boo Sportsplex, BMX Extreme Sports Complex, aquatics competition, or splash park facility were the initial ones mentioned. Since this time, we've had folks come forward about sailing in our community and enhancing regattas in our community, in particular in partnership with Fort Monroe. So there are lots of opportunities here. I only mention that to say that the idea is here, how do we get more overnight stays and tax revenue, and at the same time have facilities that are of benefit to the community, whether it's one of these or the regatta or others. These are also opportunities for our residents to use as a quality of life facility. Finally, I want to talk about Choose Hampton. Many of the things I touched on very quickly and acknowledged a lot of people don't know about. We need to spread the word and make sure people know about that. We've started a Choose Hampton campaign. We hope you will help us with this. Those of you who are on Facebook, we're posting new videos each week. We have, if you see the billboard out on the interstate, we're not paying for that billboard. It's actually free revenue to this, free advertising to the city because the billboard is on city property. And so we're choosing to highlight the many reasons why our business community chooses Hampton and our residents choose Hampton. And we have, as hopefully you know, businesses that have been here over 100 years, like Patrick Hardware, to Measurement Specialties, the company I talked about earlier, that although they're one of the top fastest growing companies in the U.S., they still choose Hampton as home. We have small businesses like Arethual Cupcakes that open at Peninsula Town Center that choose Hampton as home for their business. The Mango Ladies, I don't know how many of you watch Shark Tank, but they were on Shark Tank, and they've chosen, although they probably have offers from all over the country, they choose to stay in Hampton because they call it their home and they believe in the business culture we've created here. And even our residents, we're going to feature residents. Any of you who want to be featured, we certainly look forward to having your statements. But Francina McCory was a Bethel High School graduate, a Hampton University graduate, runs all over the world, wins Olympic gold, and stays in Hampton. So you're going to start to see more of this, touting the things that we do have going right in Hampton, because success begets success. And what's important for us to grow our way out of some of these budget challenges is to keep that momentum going. So please help us with that if you can. Now, to end tonight on the preference polling, and then we'll answer the few questions that we've gotten here or any others that you may have, we're going to ask you to pull out your polling devices once more. We're going to ask you about some of these investment choices to see if you think we're on track with the right types of investments. So on retail, the question here is, do you support the city's efforts to bring more retail and restaurants to the area as a tax base enhancement strategy? If so, you would indicate A. If not, if you don't think the city should be involved in economic development of this sort, you would choose B. And we did lose a few people, so that's probably about right. Okay, good. I hope that means you will also shop and eat in Hampton as much as possible. Remember, we don't want to help Newport News' budget. We want to help ours. And that means getting your friends in Newport News to come eat and shop in Hampton, too. All right, new housing. Do you support efforts to redevelop blighted property to increase housing values? Or do you think Hampton should not be redeveloping or acquiring blighted properties? A or B? When we do these blighted property acquisitions, by the way, it's coming out of that one-time kind of money we talked about earlier. Okay. And then we have the incentives for current homeowners. I touched very briefly on the fact that we have curb appeal investment grants. Right now, they're limited to areas of the city where we've had master plans done, but we may offer these in a broader fashion in the future if the public agrees that this is a good way to grow our tax base. This would be minor grants to do curb appeal outside, improve painting, fencing, other kinds of things that bring down the appearance of a home. Strong support for that as well. Then as we turn to the tourism, in particular, we're interested in your thoughts about additional capacity for youth sports that I touched on. Not asking you to weigh in on any particular facility, but do you like the concept of investing in facilities that will bring overnight stays and also be a recreational amenity for our residents? So that would be A if yes, and B if you don't think we should be adding any such facilities to our community at this time. Okay. And job creation in particular, we want to see what you think about our strategy of marketing our business park that I referenced, that last remaining land we have for business development out in Magruder North as a science and technology center. Does that make sense to you as a strategy? If so, A. If not, B. Some people think that the city shouldn't be involved in economic development. The marketplace should take care of itself. So that's why that B choice is there. Okay, strong support for that. And, that's it. Any of those things we can certainly answer more. I had to go over them quickly in the interest of time. But I do want to let you know the timetable for the school budget decisions and for the city budget decisions. And then I'm going to answer the questions that were brought forward here. And I'll stay as long as you all want. If someone has to leave, we said we'd get you out of here by 8, so I want to honor that. But we can stay as long as you need us to answer questions. The school budget timetable, as you can see up here, the superintendent's recommended budget will be presented on March 12th. The school board has hearings on the 19th, the 26th, and April 2nd prior to their vote, which I guess would be on April the 2nd. And their meetings are held here if you want to come and participate in those meetings. On the city budget timetable, as Dr. Shiflett mentioned, they're ahead of us, largely for the revenue reasons I mentioned earlier. We don't get good estimates till mid-March. So our timetable is that we have, of course, additional input sessions this week on Thursday and Saturday, but the manager's recommended budget will come out on April 15th, and council will deliberate on it on the 23rd, May 7th, and May 14th will be the final vote there. I have here some questions and comments, so we'll go through those. One of them, and I apologize if I'm not doing them in the right order, I'm just doing them as they've been handed to me. What about the boat tax? The boat tax is a form of the personal property tax, and I will say that in the first couple years I was city manager, I suggested raising a tax on the boats. Really sort of more a matter of equity, because one school of thought is that they're recreational vehicles and therefore they should be taxed. Another school of thought about that, the school of thought that won out at that particular time when I made those recommendations, was we have the opportunity, because of our gorgeous waterfront and facilities, to be a destination for boaters. And in fact, we are a destination for boaters. And boaters will move their boats to our community if we have a favorable tax rate, and that has indeed panned out to be the case. We had an independent study done. Pete, who did that study? I'm forgetting the boat tax study for us. I'm sorry? VIMS, that's right, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, that validated that. And so in light of that information, the council chose to have a boat tax rate of 0. And basically what I have said in the years since is that councils weighed on that at least 2 times, and given that policy, we've been marketing our community as a no boat tax community, and in light of that, I don't plan to raise the boat tax in my recommended budget, but it's something that the council certainly consider. But the council's been very clear on the policy that we should try to market ourselves as a no boat tax community, so that's why I don't have that one up there as a polling choice. Is there enough money in the budget to install curb and gutter at a particular street, and when can curb and gutter be installed? Building of roads was stated in this meeting. Curb and gutter is a very complicated kind of issue, and this really gets to our development as a community. Many neighborhoods that were built before we had a subdivision ordinance, before that became a way of doing business in the Commonwealth and throughout the country, were developed without curb and gutter. Then when we got subdivision ordinances that required developers of subdivisions to put those in, the developers basically finance curb and gutter. When a developer pays for it, then they sell the lot to you as a homeowner, you're paying for it. You're paying the developer back for that infrastructure. So the neighborhoods that don't have curb and gutter, the homeowners obviously didn't pay for it, but in the neighborhoods that do, the homeowners did through the sale and the purchase price of their home. So you have an equity question. Should government pay 100% of the curb and gutter installation for people who didn't have it when residents who do have it had to pay for 100% themselves? And the way we've tried to balance that over the years is to have what we call a special assessment program, where the city has committed to pay 50% if the homeowners will pay for the 50% else, because that's sort of a fair balance, because to pay for it 100% on your own would be practically impossible. What we allow in that special assessment program is to have the homeowner finance it over time as a charge against their real estate tax bill effectively, because they may not be able to come up with it all at one time. So we let them spread the payments out over time if they want to do that. We did put curb and gutter in some select neighborhoods through what's called the Community Development Block Grant Program. It's federal money that is designated for particular low-income areas, and we were able to use that money for those specific purposes. But in the absence of that, we can't take that money and say higher income areas and apply it. So it really would be at 100% taxpayer expense, when some other homes, most of the homes that were built with developer-funded infrastructure, those homeowners had to pay 100% of the cost. So that's sort of the challenge there. Let's see, I got my cards all mixed up. Here's a question about Obamacare and how it would affect the city of Hampton part-time workforce. We currently, as an employer, do not offer health insurance to part-time employees. Under the Affordable Health Care Act, we would need to provide health insurance coverage at the same rate as we do for full-time employees for part-time employees. So, we obviously have to look at that potential cost. I will say that we have we have 3 types of part-time employees. We have part-time employees who work year in and year out and have a steady set of hours. Those are the ones we would have to pick up the cost for. We also have seasonal part-time folks like lifeguards. The Affordable Health Care Act makes exclusions for, say, seasonal workers. And then we have a third category of what we call temporary people who come in for limited times. If they're truly temporary, we call them WAEs, then they also are excluded. But if we have WAEs who work year in and year out on a regular schedule but aren't called part-time employees, they would be eligible for that as well. So what we've done to try to minimize the impact to the locality and to the taxpayer is we've made a rule that temporary employees and part-time employees in the future can't work more than a certain number of hours. But we're trying to work with the existing base that we have that had a set hours so that we don't cut back or scale their hours back if we can at all avoid that. But we do have to be responsible and make sure we don't put too much of a tax burden on the taxpayers by adding a lot of people to health care all at one time. So we're trying to manage that with managing hours in the future. Then some of these are just comments, and I'll share them for the record. One school system is school attendance be Only by residents switch to semester promotion midway through the year, some students are known to have to be retained. We have no funds to continue spending on recreational social activities. Those who want them should pay for them. Charge Fort Monroe for services, no support from the city. Fort Monroe, for those of you who aren't aware, I just got to clarify this, is part of the city of Hampton. Therefore, we are legally obligated to provide education, police, fire, and emergency medical services, the basic requirements, core services of government. We have no choice about it. They're part of us. We do get what's called a payment in lieu of tax from the state. Well, really from the Fort Monroe Authority. The state budgets for it in the General Assembly session. We're getting roughly $1 million in revenue through that vehicle. What I've tried to do is to control expenses so that we don't spend more out there than we collect in that payment of lieu of tax. But as Fort Monroe activity grows, and we hope that it grows, we may not be able to equally equate service delivery with the activity out there, because as an example, if they build say a new apartment complex and there are a lot of children there, I can't keep the kids from going to the school system. So we're trying to manage that as best as we can so we don't put any extra tax burden on the Hampton taxpayers, but we do have legal obligations out there. And we're trying to work to get this, the General Assembly put a cap on that pilot payment. Ideally, the pilot payment should reflect an actual tax bill so that for the assessed value out there, the idea was that they would pay the same tax bill at the same rate that other Hampton residents and businesses pay. But right now there's a cap on how much they'll pay, and that was put into effect by the last General Assembly. I understand that currently the Senate version of the budget removes that pilot cap, so we would get paid the full amount that we would be due, whereas the House side of the budget doesn't. So we're working that issue in Richmond.
How much of a difference are we talking
About $600,000. If they paid the true tax bill, it would be about $1.6 million. To preserve Fort Monroe, the city should encourage the state government headquarters, the Virginia National Guard, on the post and lease the excess to reserve units. I'll pass that on. Although we have the legal responsibility for providing police and fire and education, we don't get to make the land use decisions at Fort Monroe. The independent board appointed by the governor, we have 2 slots of 12 that we appoint. 10 of them are appointed by the governor or our cabinet secretaries. They actually make those decisions. Then there's some comments about, on the city side, removing fees like sewer and solid waste from the water bill and putting them on the property tax so they can be made tax deductible. Actually, putting them on the real estate bill does not make them tax deductible. They're not recognized as tax deductible fees from the federal government. It's not what's on your real estate tax bill, it's the fact that it's real estate tax. Yes, ma'am?
What I meant by that statement is include that in services that are provided by the city.
Oh, raise the real estate tax to do it, is that what you meant?
It was always that way. We never paid for sewer and we never paid to have our trash picked up.
Okay, I misunderstood what the comment was, okay.
Yes, it would be considered the same as the police and fire department.
Okay, so shift it back to the real estate tax bill as opposed to having a separate user fee. Okay, I'm glad you clarified that, thank you. Because I didn't understand, I thought you meant just put it on the bill, so thank you. Increase Right, yeah, that's why I thought maybe sometimes people don't understand what the legal issues are, so I thought that, anyway. Increase middle income residents by requiring that all city employees live in the city. The state government does not allow us to do that. State law does not allow us. We have to go to the General Assembly and try to get them to change it, and there have been efforts made in the past by localities in Virginia, and the General Assembly has resisted that for a variety of reasons. And there also get to be some potential issues of is it fair to require people to live in a city, and what are their rights as individuals and stuff. I will say that we do require that department heads and above live in the city. There are a few grandfathered exceptions before the city made that rule, but as an example, since I've been city manager, all department heads and above are required to live in the city. And I think that's all that I have. Are there any other cards? Oh, you have one? Okay.
And before I answer the question, I'd like to acknowledge that we've had several school board members here this evening. Mr. Kilgore, Joe Kilgore, who's our vice chair, Jennifer Phillips, Phyllis Henry was here, and also Monica Smith. So I just wanted to acknowledge them and thank them for their support this evening. I have a question. What's the advantage of program at the high schools, and what's available at New Horizons? And I think I'm interpreting this to mean Are we working together in terms of what's offered at the high schools and New Horizons? And if that's not what you meant, let me know. But yes, we do. It's very important because we actually own a portion of New Horizons. We are one of the founding members of New Horizons. And we work together with them to design these career pathways. So for example, if we're looking at the Health Sciences Academy at Bethel High School, and we have a young person who wants to be an emergency medical technician, they would go on over to New Horizons to get that particular training. So yes, we do work very closely with one another. It's very important that we not replicate things, because we need to create efficiencies in our school division.
That was my question.
Uh-huh.
You said robotics is down at Phoebus, but there's also robotics over at New Horizons.
Well, remember that New Horizons serves 6 school divisions. And while we have robotics, the rest of them don't. And so sometimes there is some duplication because of the regional cooperation of the facility. For example, Gloucester, Williamsburg, James City County don't offer a robotics program. I don't think York County does either. And I have to tell you, I really wish you'd come and visit the robotics program. It is amazing. And we have 2 engineers.
And they're
Amazing.
excited about
Yeah.
it.
So we have people who are certified engineers working with the children, with our young people.
Any other questions? You all have been very diligent in staying. I want to thank you again for coming out tonight. I'll stay back. No, Dr. Shiflett will stay back if you have questions about the school system. Can't thank you enough for caring enough about your community to come out, regardless of what your opinion is. We may not always agree on everything, like the conversation earlier, but this is very helpful to us to have the open dialogue, and it's part of who we are as Hampton. So thank you again.